Repase. How did people manage to sleep during the Middle Ages, in times without the warmth of today's heaters or the ease of modern mattresses? In those brutal conditions, a restful night was a real ordeal. Every precious hour of slumber was truly invaluable. This account will carry you into the dim chambers and frigid huts of centuries gone by, where sleep was a scarce comfort, and daily life itself was a fight to endure. Subscribe now and dive into the harsh truths of medieval existence, discovering how even something as ordinary as sleep could feel like an act of quiet heroism. In medieval times, people didn't typically sleep through the night in one go. Their nights were broken into two separate phases. The initial rest would begin soon after sundown, after work had ended and the fire in the hearth began to fade. This first segment of sleep, often lasting 4 hours, was known to be the deepest and most restorative part of their rest. Following this, usually between midnight and 2 o'clock, came a wakeful period called the vigil. This phase between two sleeps wasn't unusual. In fact, it was completely embedded in the lifestyle of the time. During these peaceful hours, people might offer prayers, tend to the hearth, visit a neighbor, or simply sit quietly beside the glowing embers. Many use this time to mend clothes, sharpen tools, or prep meals for dawn. Writers refer to it as the hour of the soul, a time of quiet introspection. Some Old English and French sources even claim that during this interval, between the two sleeps, God felt closest. The vigil was also when couples would share intimacy, away from daily noise and onlookers. After 1 or 2 hours awake, they would return to sleep, the second slumber, which carried them to dawn or the rooster's first crow. Then it was time again for labor, to tend cattle, return to the fields, or feed the barn. Today's sleep scientists have confirmed that this biphasic sleep pattern might be the body's natural rhythm. In the absence of electric light, human biology seems to divide rest into two parts, with a spontaneous midnight wake-up. Historian Roger Eckert documented this as a normal aspect of medieval life. This custom began to fade only with the introduction of street lighting during the Industrial Revolution. With factories, train timetables, and rigid work routines, people were forced into uninterrupted sleep. But in rural Europe, the dual sleep system lingered into the 1800s. This understanding gives us a glimpse into the slower, more segmented rhythm of life at that time. Nights weren't just pitch-black interludes. They were moments of stillness, breathing space between two halves of waking and dreaming. Sleep wasn't a retreat from life, but an intimate, physical part of it. Most peasants didn't even have beds, and often not even a room designated for sleeping. Their main living area, where they cooked, ate, spun thread, repaired tools, and lived, was also where they slept. Wooden planks or benches lined the walls, and those who didn't have space would sleep directly on the hard dirt floor. They usually didn't change clothes for sleep, not for comfort, but because of the biting cold. Their bedding, straw or hay packed into sacks, sometimes draped with coarse cloth or worn cloaks. The rich might have wool mattresses, but among peasants, hay piles were more common. Sleeping near the hearth was highly valued. The warmth was reserved for the elderly, children, or the sick. There was no clear divide between animals and people. Chickens, pigs, goats, even cows often shared the same space. Their body heat and breath offered extra warmth, a buffer against cold drafts and damp walls. Even in large homes, bedrooms were rare. A curtain or hanging cloth might provide a tiny sense of privacy. Beds as furniture only began appearing in rural homes around the 14th century, and even then, they were low wooden frames with no mattress as we know it, only a layer of feathers or wool, if that. In southern Europe, some peasants slept on stone platforms covered with mats or sheepskin. In colder northern regions, they built sleeping niches into the walls, places that trapped the heat better and shielded them from drafts. Babies were often placed in hanging burlap cradles, suspended from ceiling beams, away from rats and cold. Doors at night were sealed with cloth or rag bundles, and windows, if there were any, closed with wooden shutters. The floors were mostly clay or dirt, so clothes often grew damp by morning, making rising difficult. Even small noises echoed in those rooms, but quiet wasn't expected. Talking, snoring, the fire crackling, this was the nighttime soundtrack. Sleep was communal, not private, just another shared part of existence, like eating or labor. In huts with no partitions, privacy was shaped not by walls, but by unspoken customs and necessity. The home was a living cocoon at night, where spouses, children, elders, infants all lay shoulder to shoulder, usually by the hearth. They were often joined by their animals, pigs, chickens, goats, all curled together to conserve warmth. This wasn't about comfort, it was about survival. Human bodies shared warmth more efficiently than any fireplace. Blankets were few. Families layered old clothing or homespun covers to create makeshift warmth. On bitter nights, people stayed half awake, tossing, turning, watching over children, or simply enduring the cold. Newborns didn't sleep in separate beds. They were cradled in someone's arms or laid between adults under the same covers. Older kids slept with their feet pointed at the fire, wrapped in sacks or their father's sweat-drenched coat. The eldest family members got the warmest spots, closest to the flames, and the leftover pieces of hide or wool. This nighttime closeness was more than a matter of shelter. It was a way of life, born out of necessity, and fully accepted by the culture. Privacy, as we know it, didn't exist. Even newlyweds slept among relatives, separated only by a thin cloth. Among nobles, the scene was different, but only slightly. Even in castles, bedrooms often had multiple occupants. Servants, tutors, younger siblings, all within arm's reach. Women's quarters were shared by sisters, governesses, and aunts. Men at arms or knights slept in rows on long benches, more like military barracks than bedrooms. Medieval values didn't view shared sleeping as improper. What mattered were religious rules, like church laws from the 1200s that forbade a husband from touching his wife during fasting periods. But sharing sleeping space? That was simply how life worked. No one was shocked if siblings or a mother and son shared a haystack. Even animals were woven into this domestic life, a cow beneath a lean-to, a pig nestled in straw, offering their warmth like substitute walls, especially when real ones didn't exist. Sometimes, multiple families shared long huts, living, sleeping, and surviving side by side. Children who barely knew each other grew up in a world of communal sleep. In this shared nighttime ritual, a unique awareness of the body developed. Everyone instinctively understood where their limbs were, how to avoid nudging the elder or disturbing a nearby child. Laughter, murmurs, coughs, and quiet whispers filled the night air, together forming a rich, many-voiced symphony of dreams. Only in the stillest part of the night, when sleep finally overtook everyone, did the silence fall, broken only by the sound of breathing and the soft hiss of cooling embers. This wasn't merely rest, it was a way of bonding, grounded in labor, fatigue, and resilience. And although no one slept with the peace of a modern person, they all woke together to face another day. In medieval huts, comforters and spring mattresses were unheard of. Instead, people used whatever could soften the feel of the hard floor or wooden planks. The most common solution was straw, stuffed into old sacks, spread directly across the floor, or wrapped in worn linens. Straw was rarely changed, sometimes only once per season. By late winter, it would become compacted and coarse, full of crumbs, grime, and crawling insects. If available, families would layer sheepskins or coarse homemade wool blankets on top. The animal hide provided warmth and kept bugs at bay. It even masked the smell of human sweat with its own distinct scent. This bedding wasn't luxurious, but people had grown up with it. Their bodies were used to hardness. During warmer months, bundles of moss, dry grass, or even tattered cloth scraps might serve as makeshift mattresses. Poorer households often slept straight on the wood, with just a shirt and an arm as a pillow. In parts of Europe, people used reed mats or linen sacks stuffed with spoiled hay, a cheap but short-lived solution. In some cottages, a raised wooden platform in the corner helped avoid dampness from the floor. On this podium, they layered burlap or rag-filled cushions to block drafts. This makeshift platform, sometimes called a bedstead or top chan, was usually built beside the stove to capture lingering heat. Urban dwellers with more means sometimes had actual beds, large cloth bags filled with feathers or wool. But these too required constant fluffing and sunning to prevent rot and pests. In the South, lightweight wooden frames were stretched with straw mats, popular where insulation wasn't as critical. Monks and soldiers, especially on the move, often used sacks of coarse fabric filled with dry dirt or ash. Bare wood floors, particularly in unheated homes, offered no protection from cold. Cloth layers were added beneath the feet, and special bundles of twisted wool were placed beneath the lower back to prevent pain. In the far north, like Scandinavia, animal hides from elk, bear, or wolf were placed atop the boards. These were cherished, passed through generations, and saved for harshest winters or youngest children. In Slavic regions, people wove rugs from hemp, wool, and old fabric, often still carrying soot from the oven. This kind of bedding was not a sign of poverty, it was a part of life, crafted with care. Women made the sacks, dried and filled the straw, and sewed the layers. They even mixed in herbs like chamomile, wormwood, or St. John's wort to soothe and ward off insects. These mattresses wore out quickly, but they were born of knowledge and necessity. They didn't offer softness, but they offered sleep, earned after long, back-breaking days. Warmth came not from comfort, but from tired muscles and crowded bodies, breathing the earthy air of animals, fire, and soil. In winter, there were no fleece blankets or down duvets. People covered themselves with whatever they could find, old travel cloaks, wool remnants, or patched together scraps handed down from parents. If the fabric was thin, they folded it several times and tied it around the chest or legs to preserve heat. Sacks that once held grain or flour were repurposed into bedding. Families stitched together worn-out garments into quilts, each patch a memory of past hardship. Complete, soft sheepskins were a rarity and often inherited like treasure. In northern regions, hides from larger animals, like goats, wolves, or bears, were used. Warm but heavy, their strong scent helped repel insects, which were everywhere during the long, cold winters. Women preserved and softened these hides using home remedies. Some used salt, others bark infusions to mask the odor. Sometimes, even dry straw was placed on top of the sleeper, acting like a natural insulating layer. Long fabric tubes were filled with wool or hay and laid along the edges of the body to trap warmth. In monasteries and upper-class homes, thick woven blankets, often colored in dark hues like navy or burgundy, were bought or traded from weavers. They held warmth and didn't show dirt easily. Monks sometimes slept in their robes, as even they lacked proper bedding. Families often shared one large blanket. Everyone curled tightly beneath it. Children were bundled between parents or wrapped head to toe to keep their faces from freezing. In the coldest months, even goats and puppies were pulled under the covers. Any warm body helped. There was a saying, if you sleep beside someone, winter won't take you. This folk wisdom passed from mouth to mouth. In some homes, cloth partitions created makeshift sleeping compartments, trapping heat and offering the illusion of walls. Wealthier homes had heavy curtains or canopies around beds to ward off drafts. Even royalty, in old paintings, are shown tucked under layers of cloth and fur. Archaeological digs suggest that feather-filled blankets existed by the 5th century, but only the very rich owned them. Common folk made do with what didn't rot or soak. They layered everything they had, old jackets, worn shirts, patched canvas, anything to keep the cold out. Warmth came from closeness, creativity, and tradition. A single rag or scrap of wool could become a blanket in a frozen house. Yet, even without modern comfort, people still slept. Their bones were weary, their breath slow, their minds set on the day ahead. So they wrapped themselves in old skins, lay down beside their dogs, and let the cold remain outside the thin walls. When frost reached inside the walls by evening, people searched for warmth before sleep. One of the most effective methods was to heat bricks or stones in the fire. Wrapped in burlap, cloth, or hide, they were tucked into the bed to pre-warm it. These glowing heat sources were placed at the feet or center of the bedding minutes before sleeping. On bitter nights, people would cling to them, soaking up the warmth before it vanished. In places like northern England and Scandinavia, this practice was almost ceremonial. Children got small stones, women got 2. Bricks from broken stoves or river-smooth stones were favorites. They heated fast and cooled slowly. Historians have found old bedding stained with soot, proof of this widespread practice. The warmth didn't just ease the cold, it prevented the chill from seeping into bones and bedding. If the sleeping straw was damp, a heated stone could mean the difference between shivering all night or sleeping soundly. Moisture had to be driven out, especially in earthen or thatch-roofed homes where dampness rose from below and cold seeped in from every direction. Some families would heat stones and place them into large pots by the bedhead, a primitive form of nighttime heating. In monasteries and castles, more advanced methods appeared. Metal foot warmers filled with coals, wrapped in fabric, eventually evolved into bed warmers. But for the average peasant, who had little access to metal, stone was a dependable ally in the harsh winters. Women took special care to maintain order and safety. To prevent burns, hot stones were placed at the far end of the bed beneath layers of thick cloth. During the day, those same stones found other uses, resting on the laps of elderly women or those working indoors, such as spinners and net menders, providing comfort against the chill. On military campaigns, soldiers carried smooth stones in their packs to warm their hands at rest stops, later placing them under their cloaks to ease the cold of the ground. Records from the Hundred Years' War suggest that Anglo-Norman armies used this method to keep warm in camp. In Eastern Europe and Russia, heated stones served both in bathhouses and daily routines. Known by various local names such as Lesny or Camilla, they were even used by herbalists as treatments, placed on the stomach, back, or feet to soothe pain or combat chills. This method was widely trusted. This ancient method became a silent ritual, a language of warmth handed down from hand to hand, from furnace to bedding, from one generation to the next. Beneath a tattered cloak, the warmth of a stone was more than comfort. It was a small defiance against winter's bite. It was not indulgence, but a skill, a discipline that kept people alive through the darkest nights. While embers dimmed in the hearth and snowstorms battered the world outside, the heated stone in its cloth bundle cooled gradually, absorbing the fear of frost with it. In dwellings without heat, the cold would arrive at sunset, slipping in through gaps in the walls and creeping up from the stone floors. That's why people didn't undress for bed. Instead, they slept in tunics, wool shirts, tightly woven pants, and even their boots. This was especially true for peasants. Even in noble homes with fireplaces and solid walls, not every room could be heated, so people bundled up in clothes for extra insulation. Boots kept feet warm and protected them from damp floors, especially where the floor was bare earth or laid with moist planks. At night, boots were loosened, not removed, to retain warmth, especially if one slept on straw or beside livestock. Monastery rules and peasant records both confirm that clothes stayed on not just overnight, but often for days or even weeks. It wasn't preference, it was necessity. Undressing meant exposure to the cold, and changing clothes usually happened only on weekly bath days. Children went to sleep in whatever they'd worn all day. Perhaps an old hide or heavy cloak would be added. There were no nightgowns, only the same shirt used for labor and sleep. The poor rarely owned more than one or two shirts for an entire season. Cloth was too scarce to afford separate sleeping garments. Every scrap was repurposed and patched. Boots, too, were essential. Mornings required people to step outside without delay for chores, livestock, or neighborly calls. Even a nighttime trip outdoors to fetch water or check animals was easier if boots were already on. For soldiers, sleeping in boots was often mandatory to be ready for surprise attacks. Monks, too, in colder monasteries, often kept their shoes on at night, not out of comfort, but because of the frigid stone cells. Historian Jacques Le Goff notes that during winter months, monastic quarters were as cold as peasant cottages, and the brothers slept in their work clothes. After outbreaks of plague and sudden frosts, English chronicles tell of peasants sleeping fully dressed, even donning fur capes, worn tunics, or sheepskins on top of their regular clothing to create layers of insulation. The belief was simple: the body would warm the clothing. The best posture was curled tightly, knees bent, arms against the chest, wrapped in a cloak or hide. Village women even gave advice on which garments best protected from catching a chill during sleep. Some might take off their boots and use them as pillows, but many left them on, particularly where damp floors threatened from beneath. In the morning, the air was often freezing, and it was hard to recover lost body heat. People knew falling ill at night meant being too weak to work in the morning. And without work, survival wasn't possible. So a tradition formed: preserve every bit of warmth, wear everything that helped, and never surrender to the cold. Sleeping clothed, even in boots, wasn't wild or primitive. It was an age-old defense strategy, proven by generations sleeping in straw corners beside dying embers. Even with daylight, clothes stayed on, armor against the lingering cold. A medieval night was rarely peaceful. It was often disturbed by itching skin, coughing fits, scurrying rats, and half-conscious worry. Sleep was shallow, easily interrupted by fleas, rustling vermin, or someone sneaking to the hearth for food. Bed bugs lurked in hay, beams, and wooden joints. No homemade remedy kept them away for long. Peasants didn't consider their homes truly clean, not for lack of care, but because insects and mice were impossible to banish. Damp floors, livestock nearby, stagnant puddles, and decomposing straw made perfect habitats for pests. Chronicles mention the use of fumigating herbs like wormwood and juniper, but these brought only brief relief. Even nobles had fleas scraped off their bedding by servants before sleep, despite rich fabrics and cushions. Dirt clung to skin, clothes, and blankets. Baths were rare, especially in winter, and soot, sweat, and lice created discomfort. Even noble families often bathed just once a week. In rural areas, winter bathing was considered risky. Colds, fevers, and rashes spread fast in the close, smoky air. Sharing a room with a sick person often meant getting sick yourself. But there was no choice. Especially after harvest, when exhaustion lowered immunity, night became dangerous. Infant deaths from fever or suffocation were noted in church records, common, tragic realities. Even adults feared sleep without prayer. Night belonged to spirits. Shadows grew closer to the weak. Some left vinegar or ashes by the bed to ward off rats, real threats that could spread disease or bite a sleeping face. After the 14th century plague, fear of nighttime contagion intensified. Monks kept embers burning under beds to ward off evil. In parts of Europe, iron tools were placed by the bed, not for protection from people, but to repel demons. Cross-shaped nails were hammered into doors. Embroidered crosses or protective runes were hung in windows, heirlooms passed down through generations. Coals left glowing in corners symbolized life. A superstition warned that empty jugs attracted spirits. They were always covered. The time between first and second sleep, midnight to about 3, was thought to be the hour when witches gathered and dead souls returned. People avoided rising during this window. If they had to, they lit candles and whispered prayers. In some villages, a piece of bread was left on the windowsill for wandering spirits. This was both kindness and protection, meant to appease the unseen. Records tell of monks suffering terrifying attacks in sleep paralysis, breathlessness, strange hallucinations. Today, we call it night terrors or sleep paralysis. To them, it was demonic. Some awoke with scratches or bruises, believed to be the work of witches or devils. Even couples sometimes accused each other of bewitchment after bad dreams. Villages had night watchmen, not just to guard against thieves, but against spirits. These men carried crosses or blessed staffs, walking between homes, chanting prayers. Their presence gave psychological comfort, if not actual safety. Children were warned never to look out windows after dark, lest they lock eyes with a spirit. A hooting owl at the window was a bad omen. No one slept easily afterward. Even the wind could be terrifying, its howl mistaken for the cries of the dead. Sleep in medieval times wasn't just rest. It was a struggle against the unknown, a nightly battle against cold, filth, and fear. Survival demanded rituals, strength, and belief. People clung to practices and protections, convinced that the invisible world watched, waiting. So each sunrise was welcomed with gratitude. Another night was over. The evil hadn't taken anyone. During periods of conflict and widespread hunger, sleep turned into a rare and precious escape, especially for men summoned to fight, whose rest was short-lived and filled with unease. On battlefields and in ruined settlements, people snatched what little sleep they could manage, if their nerves allowed it. Constant danger and dread robbed them of true rest. Historical accounts from the medieval era speak of warriors dozing off while sitting upright, still clad in their armor, often on uneven piles of rubble or bare earth, always bracing for an ambush or the next skirmish. Hunger only deepened the hardship. Weak bodies found no peace, and hunger pains tightened their insides, turning sleep into a painful, fragmented ordeal. Often, it wasn't wounds or blades that took lives, but pure exhaustion and relentless sleeplessness. In the dim glow of torches within fortress corners or temporary war tents, people lay down on rough wooden boards or cold dirt, praying for even a few moments of rest. During long sieges, some townspeople were forced to alter their sleeping habits, grasping at multiple short naps throughout the day to regain bits of energy. Sleeping beneath makeshift covers or inside deserted buildings was nerve-wracking. Every crunch of gravel, every rattle of a sword, Every distant cry of the injured destroyed any sense of safety. For peasants whose homes were razed or burning, rest came only from crouching beside open fires. No bed, no shelter, only a desperate fight to stay warm. The emotional toll on warriors brought on frequent insomnia and haunting dreams. With no dependable shelter or warmth, true rest was a fading hope. Historical records often describe how even injured or ill soldiers couldn't fall asleep in their own camps. Illnesses and spreading infections left no room for peace. Amid this relentless tension and survival, sleep became a fragile pause, essential but elusive. Some fighters carried pouches filled with calming herbs like lavender or chamomile, hoping the faint scent might coax a few minutes of sleep. The elders and women who remained behind tried to keep order and protect the younger generation's ability to rest, because a village's survival depended on the strength of its people. Religious customs grew more meaningful during these times. Bedtime prayers became the final plea for safety and calm. Military records from the 15th century note soldiers snatching solitude between clashes, sometimes dozing while half awake, alert to every sound. Starving and worn down, they collapsed into sleep only when their bodies surrendered to fatigue, waking at the slightest disturbance, always braced for danger. In this era of hunger and conflict, sleep wasn't natural or guaranteed. It was a rare and fleeting luxury, drenched in tension. Only a few managed to find true rest, and even then, it was brief and fearful. Recognizing these conditions allows us to value the remarkable strength and courage of those who endured the Middle Ages when every chance to sleep could be their final one. This reality reminds us that even our most basic human needs, like sleep, became difficult to fulfill in such brutal times. In this context, sleep was no longer just a biological need. It mirrored the struggle for life in a world where endurance, hope, and resilience were often the only things left. Sleep in the medieval world was far more than just closing one's eyes. It was a symbol of survival amid cold, hardship, and fear. Under these severe conditions, each moment of rest was a hard-won blessing. The ability to endure kept people grounded in their humanity and hope. By grasping this truth, we gain greater respect for the strength and perseverance of those who lived in an age without today's comforts. Their dreams echoed the challenges of daily life, where even nightfall brought new threats. Yet through their constant trials, they pressed forward, shaping history in the process. Thank you for watching. Be sure to subscribe and leave a like if you'd like to explore more fascinating insights into life during the Middle Age.